Great to be back at Springwood School. And as you can see, I brought my paints with me, so once again you're going to have to watch as well as listen carefully. As I tell you, another great, well, I won't say it, I'll tell you. A story. And the Bible, of course, is full of great, true stories. Stories of adventures, stories of kings, stories of amazing miracles. But the story from the Bible I want to tell you today is this kind of story. I love stories. That's right. Sorry boys, it is a bit mushy, but the good news is there's not too much kissing in it. Anyway, let's start with a family photo. Because, well, if you're looking for love, families is a good place to begin, isn't it? Now, of course, in the Bible times, they didn't have cameras, so this is an imaginary family photo. And in this family, there was Mum, whose name was Naomi, and her two grown-up sons, who were called Mahlon and Chilion. You might say, well, where's Dad? Well, sometimes in families, things happen. And this is what happened in this family. This family lived in Bethlehem. Now, we all know who was born in Bethlehem. Of course, that was Jesus. But this family lived a long time before Jesus. And as the boys were growing up, there was a famine in the land. And perhaps some of you know, a famine is when the crops, the food doesn't grow in the fields, and there isn't enough food for people to live. And so there wasn't enough food to eat. And so Dad, Naomi's husband, said, we need to leave Bethlehem and go and move to another country. So they packed up and they moved to another country called Moab, and there they settled down. But then something really sad happened, because Naomi's husband got sick and died. How sad is that? But things took a turn for the better when Naomi's two grown-up sons found two lovely girls and got married. The names of the girls were Orpah and Ruth. Everything was fine for a little while, but then again tragedy struck, because both Mahlon and Chilion, the two young men, they got sick and they died. How awful is that? Poor Orpah, poor Ruth, poor Naomi. She's lost her husband, she had to leave her home, and now her two sons have died. In fact, Naomi got quite angry with God, which is sometimes what happens to people when sad things happen. But then she heard that back in Bethlehem, there was food growing again. And so she thought the best thing to do is to pack up and go back home. So she and the two girls, Orpah and Ruth, packed up their things and they headed down the road back towards Bethlehem. Now, they hadn't gone too far when Naomi said to them, girls, I really can't look after you. I'm in a really bad way. I think the best thing for you to do is go back to your homes where you grew up and start again. May God show kindness to you like you've showed kindness to me. Well, the two girls were really upset. What should they do? There was Naomi, and should they leave her all alone? Or should they go home? Or what? In fact, they were so upset they began to cry. They didn't know what to do. But after a while, Orpah decided maybe the best thing was for her to go back home. So she gave Naomi a big kiss. Don't worry, boys, that's the only kissing in the whole story. And she said goodbye, and she said, set off back home. But the other one, whose name, remember, was Ruth, said, no way, I'm not going to leave you now. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And what Ruth said to Naomi shows me something important about this word love. Because she said, I'm going to stick with you through thick and thin, up and down. I'll be there for you. And isn't it great when people love us like that and care for us and say, whatever happens, I'll be there for you. And that's what Ruth did for Naomi. And it must have been a very brave thing for Ruth to do, because it meant leaving her home, leaving her family. She said to Naomi, I'm going to stick with you. But also, what she said showed me that she had also decided she was going to trust in God. She said, your God will be my God. She said, I'm going to trust in God, the God that you know, the God that made the whole world, the God of the Bible, the God that one day will send Jesus so that we could all know that he cares for us and loves us. And boys and girls, the most important choice that I've ever made in my life was to say, I'm going to trust God and follow Jesus and go his way, just like Ruth did. So off went Naomi and Ruth back to Bethlehem, not knowing what would happen, but trusting God to look after them. When they got back to Bethlehem, about the time of the harvest, perhaps you've celebrated your harvest in school, and that's of course when you remember when the farmers bring in all the food from the fields. And it was just as well they got there at harvest, because God had given a law to Moses that the poor people should be looked after during the harvest. The farmers weren't allowed to take all the food from the fields, but they had to leave some around the outsides of the fields so the poor people could go and collect it. It was called gleaning. And Ruth said to Naomi, let me go out into the fields and get some food for us to make bread. So the next morning, that's what she did. She headed out into the fields and went to see where the workers were collecting the harvest. And here they are. Now these aren't men with extra long arms, okay? They're not mutants, but that's their scythes. That's the long knives they used to cut down the harvest. Now it just so happened that Ruth ended up in the field of a man called Boaz. And Boaz was a really cool dude. And everybody liked Boaz. And it just so happened that Boaz was a relative of Naomi's husband that had died. And it just so happened that he was a very well-respected person in Bethlehem. And it just so happened that Boaz had never quite found the right girl that he wanted to marry. I don't know why that was. Perhaps he'd been too busy working on his farm. But anyway, I don't think it happened somehow by accident. Ruth didn't plan it, Naomi didn't plan it, but I think Ruth ended up in Boaz's field because God was quietly looking after them, as we shall see. Anyway, it just so happened that later that morning, Nana, that damn cool dude Boaz, turned up to see how the work was going on. He greeted his workers, "The Lord bless you." And they all smiled, "God bless you, Boaz." They really liked him. And then he looked around and he saw Ruth working in the fields. He didn't recognize her. He thought, "I know everyone in Bethlehem." He said, "Who's that?" And they said, "That's Ruth, who's been so kind to her mother-in-law, Naomi." And they told him how ever so politely Ruth had arrived that morning and asked if it was okay to work in the fields. And they told him how since morning she worked ever so hard in the fields collecting food. Well, Boaz was impressed, very impressed, polite, hard-working, and pretty. He invited Ruth over and he said, "I suggest you work in my fields during the rest of the harvest. I'll make sure my workers look after you. And if you get thirsty, help yourself to the water in the jars that the workers have. I've heard how kind you've been to Naomi. May God reward you for what you've done." And later on, he even invited Ruth over to have lunch with him and the workers. And that afternoon, as he left to get on with his other business, he said to his workers, he said, "As you go along, make sure you leave some barley extra behind, so that Ruth can pick it up. Know what I mean? Wink, wink, wink. Don't tell her. And off he went. Well, when Ruth went home to Naomi, she had a great big bag of food. Naomi couldn't believe it. She said, whose field are you working in? And she said, it was Boaz. And Ruth thought, and Naomi thought, I know Boaz. And she got a little twinkle in her eyes. And she thought to herself, I think he fancies you, my dear. She didn't say that, but she was thinking it, I'm sure. And the next few weeks, Naomi began to think of a plan. As Ruth worked hard in the fields, Naomi thought about her plan. And when the harvest came to an end, Naomi told Ruth the plan. She said, my dear, I think it's time I found you a husband. It's the end of the harvest, and Boaz is going to be really happy. He's going to be celebrating the end of the harvest with his workers, and then he's going to be sleeping out at night, making sure no one steals the harvest before he takes it to market and stores it. What I want you to do is get your best dress on, make yourself look nice and pretty, put some perfume on, and I want you to go down and quietly, don't let anybody see you, and when Boaz lays down to sleep, I want you to lie down near his feet. Now that might seem an awful strange thing to us, and I'm sure it was awfully strange to Ruth as well. And she probably thought, I don't think his feet probably smell very nice after working in the fields. But anyway, she knew it was a good idea to listen to wise old Naomi. So that's what she did. Sure enough, Boaz was there. He celebrated the end of the harvest. And then he lay down to make sure no one would steal the harvest before they stored it away or sent it to market. And Ruth quietly went down and lay down on the floor near his feet. As I said, it probably smelled a little bit. But anyway, never mind. In the middle of the night, Boaz woke up and he said, who are you? She said, I'm Ruth. And then she said what Naomi had told her to say. She said, you are my kinsman redeemer. Which doesn't mean an awful lot to us, but basically was a fancy way of saying, if you ask me to marry you, I'll say yes. And Boaz was delighted. He thought, oh, that's really wonderful. You'd be willing to marry me, but there are a few things I need to sort out. I need to sort out a few technicalities tomorrow with the leaders of Bethlehem. It involved buying a field that belonged to Naomi's husband and a few other things that we don't have time to go into. But sure enough, the next day, Boaz sorted things out, and before long, Bethlehem had its wedding of the year with Ruth, the beautiful bride, Boaz, the handsome bridegroom, and Naomi, the proud mother-in-law. But that wasn't the only photo opportunity, because about a year later, Ruth and Boaz had a little baby boy called Obed. And so Naomi, who started off so sad, ended up the happy grandmother. But that wasn't the end of the story, because when Obed grew up, he had a son called Jesse. When he grew up, he had a son called David, who killed the giant Goliath and became King David, and he became the great, lots of other greats, grandfather of that other person that we mentioned who was born in Bethlehem, none other than Jesus. So Ruth and Boaz and Naomi ended up having an important part in God's plan. I believe God's got a plan for your life, that you can know if, like them, you put your trust in Him. So this is a story of lots of things. A story of love, a story of harvest, a story of God helping and working out His plan, but also a story of this word here. A story of kindness. Ruth showed kindness to Naomi. Boaz showed kindness to Ruth and Naomi. And God showed kindness to them all, so that the story, especially for Naomi, ended up with a happy end. Dear God, we thank you for all the great stories in the Bible. And we thank you for this story of Ruth and Naomi, this love story. Thank you how you took care of them as they put their trust in you. Thank you that you care for each one of us, and you love us, and you have a plan for our life. Help us to think how we might show kindness to someone today, to say a kindness in their life. Amen.